This is Reverend Jeff Rock from the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto, reminding you that Black lives matter, period. No ifs, no ands, no buts. As a faith community, MCC Toronto celebrates the full diversity of God's creation and names the failure to do so a sin. As a human rights committed organization, we unequivocally support those addressing systemic racism in our society and seek to address barriers to full inclusion. We commend and encourage those seeking justice through protests, activism, and education, and stand in solidarity with them, for we too dream of a world where there is equality that can only come through addressing systemic racism in all institutions, including our own. Under the leadership of Senior Pastor Emeritus Rev Dr. Brent Hawkes, MCC Toronto began the Healing Racism Initiative in 2016 in response to rising racial tensions within the congregation and wider LGBTQ2+ community after the largely queer-led Black Lives Matter movement stopped the Toronto Pride Parade. Since that time, the Healing Racism Initiative has held several days-long anti-racism workshops, having brought dozens of congregants together with community members on topics such as recognizing privilege, creating safe spaces for people of color to share, and white people educating white people about race. The work of addressing systemic racism continues with our recent book study in February 2020 on David Seitz's book, A House of Prayer for All People, Contesting Citizenship in a Queer Church, a book specifically about race relations at MCC Toronto. In 2019, we engaged in Indigenous issues with a Kairos blanket exercise and a sermon series on the 7 sacred teachings, and continue to acknowledge the traditional territories on which we gather. We annually acknowledge Black History Month, and for the first time this year, celebrated Asian Heritage Month. We will continue to engage resources to educate and address systemic racism, anti-Black racism, and seek to decolonize in all we do, using an anti-oppressive framework and regularly asking what barriers are there to full inclusion in our hiring processes, in our church programs, and in our worship. We seek to build representation and visible diversity in our Board of Governors and public-facing programs without relying on tokenism. But we must also confess that there is still much work to do, individually and collectively, because racism is systemic. The religious tradition of confession is to own our own shortcomings and commit to doing better and being better. And we will continue to confess our failings and try again until we get it right and achieve authentic equality, which will only come through equity. While the work of MCC Toronto's Healing Racism Initiative has lost some steam, we recognize this work must continue. And if you are interested in joining and re-energizing our Healing Racism Initiative, please speak to me, Reverend Jeff Rock, and you can email me at office@mcctoronto.com. In the meantime, we encourage congregants and community members to educate themselves on the lived realities of racialized and Indigenous Canadians and minority communities globally, and to join protests in your community following COVID-19 safety protocols, and to remember, as one of the songs we often sing at our 7 p.m. inspiration service, none of us are free until all of us are free. Thank you, and keep up the good work.